I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so today the topic of our webinar is challenging the Black Superwoman mentality in the Black community after pregnancy and infant loss. So we had scheduled this webinar topic before George Floyd's death or George Floyd's murder and all the protests and Black Lives Matter, all of that. So this was scheduled as part of our webinar series. And when all of this happened, both Terry and I knew that we wanted to make this topic really tied into what is currently going on in our world. And so I'm hoping that what we can do today is just offer a platform for discussion, conversation, and really that you all can be open to learning about the history of, the legacy of loss in the African American community and what these bereaved moms are going through on a different level than maybe I went through when I experienced my loss. So it's just, I really encourage everyone to be open. And I think that we're in this time where we're really saying like, I don't know everything and I need to listen and learn. And so I'm honored to be here holding the space for that. So this is a poem that Terry shared with me. Terry, do you want to read it?
Yes, I'll read it. Hey, everybody. This is a series of poems. I'll put the author in the chat. I need to pull her name. It's a series of poems that originally premiered on Instagram several years ago, which captures the experience of the strong Black woman. While struggling with the reality of being a human instead of a myth, the strong Black woman passed away. Medical sources say she died of natural causes, but those who knew her know she died from being silent when she should have been screaming, smiling when she should have been raging, from being sick and not wanting anyone to know because her pain might inconvenience them. She died from an overdose of other people clinging to her when she didn't even have the energy for herself.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry.
Tusika, this is one of 4 poems, and we'll put the reference in the chat. This is the one I use most often to introduce, to just kind of encapsulate the chronic burden that's beneath the surface of many Black women when we're referred to as strong and resilient.
Thanks, Terry. So our learning objective, am I on mute or not? No. Okay. Our learning objectives today are, we want to understand the legacy of loss within the Black community, on a bigger level than just pregnancy and infant loss. We want to describe common barriers among Black grieving parents to accessing perinatal bereavement support services and gain a knowledge of the history behind the Superwoman mentality in the Black community. So I also just want to add that, why is this important? And, as you may or may not know, mothers and infants in the Black community are dying at disproportionately higher rates than those from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Okay, so for mothers, it's the chances of them dying during or after birth is 3 to 4 times higher than white women. And babies being stillborn or preterm birth is twice as often as Caucasians. So these numbers are shocking, and we need to look at that. and understanding why this is happening. It's the result of systemic racism, racial disparities, and implicit biases within the medical community. And so as a result of these losses, like the number of losses, there's a large part of the lost community whose needs are not being met. So there's barriers to accessing support resources and services in the Black community. And so we want to look at why and how can we improve upon this. And at Return to Zero Hope, we're dedicating part of our webinar series to increasing awareness about systemic racism and its impact upon maternal health. And we're also trying to create opportunities to open conversations about grieving in the Black community. So I'm not saying, like, as me, I don't know everything, but I really want to use the platform of Return to Zero Hope to have these conversations and educate other people about what's going on behind these massive amounts of losses. So I should have introduced myself first because I'm just talking, but I'll just give a brief intro of who I am. So my name's Kylie Hanisch. I'm an occupational therapist by training, and I founded Return to Zero Hope, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to transforming the culture of pregnancy and infant loss. And so this kind of started, with my son Norbert, who was stillborn in 2005. 35 weeks, he had a liver cyst that burst, late in the pregnancy, and that killed him. And so he was stillborn. And my husband, Sean, he created the film. I mean, we did it together, but he wrote and directed and produced the film Return to Zero. And this was a feature film based on our experience of our son Norbert, who was stillborn. And so that came out in 2014. It is not on Netflix now. It's on like iTunes and Amazon, but it's a really intimate portrayal of what a couple goes through in a stillbirth after a loss, and the impact it has on their community of people. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I'm not going to focus too much on me, but that's just who I am. And so I'm helping today moderate. Dr. Terry Major Kincaid is doing most of the teaching on this, but I just really feel honored to be able to hold the space for this. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Terry Major Kincaid. Most people call me Dr. Terry, or some people call me Dr. Boo. And if you've ever met me, I've probably called you Boo too. I've been a neonatologist for entering my 21st year in the practice of neonatology. So I care for premature babies and sick-term babies, families who find themselves in the ICU nursery. And the other part of my job is running our neonatal palliative care team, our perinatal hospice team. So I'm the one that usually facilitates the consults for families who may be facing a pregnancy where they are going to experience loss, or meeting those families who are having to say hello and goodbye at the same time. I had the pleasure of attending the Return to Zero premiere in 2005. I actually have the movie poster in my media room, but I don't have time to show y'all that, but I do. So that's how I met Kylie, and I was moved by her story and that platform. I'm particularly honored to be in front of you today, healthcare providers as well as bereaved parents. I meet families every day who've experienced loss, many who look like me, who have not been able to access resources, not because the hospital where their baby delivered didn't have resources, but because the hospital didn't really know how to connect with them. And so I'm hoping we can use this platform to kind of understand what we can do different with our programs. And if we don't have programs, how we can develop programs as allies with the community. And for the bereaved parents, I'm especially looking forward to what you have to share. You are my biggest teachers. And maybe there'll be something that you learned today that will kind of explain your journey of grief, particularly for mothers of color. The grief is similar and different at the same time. And that's mostly what I'm going to be focusing on today, why this legacy of loss and grief is different and how that may impact how families access resources that you may have, wonderful resources that aren't getting to the communities that you want them to get to. So I'm excited that RTZ is holding this space. Honored to be here and looking forward to the discussion. On this picture at the bottom, you see my mom and dad. That's me in the red coat. And that's my sister sitting on my mom's lap. She was a preterm baby born in 1968, weighing less than a pound. She was not supposed to make it. She was only baby girl major for an entire 2 months because my mom was afraid to name her. And so whenever I'm talking, I always give a shout out to her. She's the reason I wanted to be a neonatologist. I wanted to hold the babies that could fit in your hand. My mom is a statistic and she beat those statistics, and my sister did too. But here we are almost 50 years later, still talking about increased rates of preterm birth and death and the legacy of loss in the African-American community. So this is certainly a full circle moment for me. And to the right is just a short book I wrote for parents in the NICU. My area of research is physician-parent communication, and I consider my primary role to empower parents to be advocates in the care of their babies in the ICU nursery. Thanks for having me, Kylie. Oh, that's my husband and kids up there. I guess y'all probably figured that out.
Thank you, Terry, for being here. I want to start with a poll with a few questions here, if I can figure out how to do this. Hold on. Wait, I don't want to do this. Come back. Okay, here we go. Sorry. So this is what I want to know. At the time of your loss, so this is for bereaved parents who are in the Black and African American community. So at the time of your loss, were you made aware of services, resources for bereaved parents? And then depending on if you answer yes or no, there's a couple other questions. So were you made aware of services? Did you access the services if you were made aware of them? And if you answered no, why not? Okay, so I'm gonna, well, there's still some, okay, I'm gonna wait a few more seconds. Okay, so let's look at this. I'm gonna share the results. So, were you made aware of services or resources for your parents? Okay, 9 of you said yes, you were. If you answered yes, did you use or access these services? The majority of you, yes, you did. If you didn't access the services, most of you said, I didn't feel like I would belong. And then a couple of you said, I didn't look at the materials. I was too paralyzed to seek support at that time. So, okay. So the next question, let's look at this. So for those of you who did receive materials in the hospital, which was 9 of you, what information were you given? So were you given information on local support groups, names of local therapists, counselors, list of national pregnancy and infant loss support, normal grief reactions, mental health after loss, funding sources for final arrangements? Okay, so I'm gonna end this and publish those results or share the results. So, okay, most people were given a list of local support groups, information about normal grief reactions, and also I'm gonna say the list of national pregnancy and infant loss support, and then some other information in there, but not overwhelming. And I'm just looking at the chat box right now too. Okay. So I'm going to do one last poll here. Okay, so did anyone from the hospital, doctor's office, or clinic follow up with you after your loss? So this would be after you've gone home, a period of time has passed, whether it be a week, a month, a year. Did anyone follow up with you? And how, if they did, yes, by mail or by phone? And also, if yes, were you more likely to access services at that time rather than immediately following your loss? So that would be like, maybe, I know for myself, immediately following my loss, I was in shock and like just stuffed everything away. If someone would have followed up with me, I may have, like later on, I may have been more in a space to access services because I was just not in a total state of shock. I'm just, while you all are doing that, I'm going to look at the chat box. Yeah, and some of you, there are no services in your area, which is another problem. If you're living not in a major area, like major city. Okay, so I'm going to share the results here. Okay, so 12 of you said that people did follow up with you and by phone, and some of you mail and phone. And if yes, were you likely to more access? So it's so you're saying no, you wouldn't access services at a later point, the majority, but not all of you. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing those now. But just,
Oh, wow.
And so just looking at some chat here. So some of you having follow-up due to autopsy results, right? Or like your 6-week checkup with your doctor, but maybe they're not talking about resources or mental health. Okay. And then I see, hold on, let me check one more thing. Sorry, it's like teaching and managing all at the same time. I'm trying to look at the Q&A, which I cannot even access right now. So, okay. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna mute myself and let Terry start sharing here. And Terry, I have to control the PowerPoint. So
Okay, I was gonna ask. Okay.
yeah, so just, you can signal to me.
Okay, first I want to just say thanks to everybody who did have time to answer the poll. Some of the themes that came up in your answers are themes we're going to see in the PowerPoint. So it was kind of exciting for me to see those themes in your questions. It also kind of made me sad that for some of you, the only follow-up was due to the autopsy meeting. And that's something that we really have to do. We in the medical community have to do a better job about. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about legacy of loss in the Black community. I think it's important that on this slide we included the time cover. This is the first time in the history of time that they actually change the way they design their cover. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to see this issue, this is a picture supposed to be symbolic of George Floyd's mother holding him as a baby, and those names in the border are the names of those who have been lost in the Black community at the hands of police brutality or through indirectly or directly as a result of racism. So it was a big deal that Time did that. And I actually have the digital copy, but I bought the hard copy just for that. Next slide. So I'm going to cover 5 themes with respect to barriers to accessing bereavement support in the African American community. Normally, when I do this type of talk, it's actually a 5-hour workshop and has a bunch of interactive exercises. But we're streamlining the information for today because we mostly want to have time for discussion and discourse and hopefully some generation of some new ideas. But I do hope that you leave today with different reasons for why grief in the African American community is different. And we're going to go through each of these reasons. So the first is mistrust of the medical community, mistrust of the medical community. So particularly for those who may not originally be from the US, there's a long history of experimentation on persons of color without their consent. There's a long history of the medical community benefiting from this research. And if you're working with a multi-generational family, there's almost always somebody in that family who remembers when people were doing research on them, not to help them, but to learn from them. So there's a healthy mistrust. People will not come into your spaces and say, hey, I don't trust you. But you need to understand that there's a blanket of mistrust for many reasons, a valid blanket of mistrust in the Black community that other communities in the US don't have. Loss, death, mistreatment is a legacy of the Black community in America, a legacy. What do I mean when I say legacy? I mean that loss is not new to this community. Loss by violent means is not new to this community. We've been experiencing loss since slavery, and loss has come to be accepted as associated with this community. I saw an article the other day that said, when was the last time you saw a Caucasian person die on national TV at the hands of a police officer? I don't think I've ever seen that if it wasn't in a movie. I've never seen that. But I mean, we've run out of names of the times we've seen persons of color die. So this legacy of loss, although it makes us sad, we get kind of numb to it because it's always been there. A fear of blame, not beating the statistics. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Someone actually shared in the survey that they didn't go to the support group because they were ashamed. And often in communities of color, we blame them for the circumstances that they're in. So I'm in the NICU every day and I hear discussions blaming mothers for having a premature baby, blaming mothers for the loss that they've experienced, blaming mothers for the situations that they find themselves in, from people who have no knowledge of what that mother has walked through. And we don't blame other communities that way. We don't start off our histories in other communities with all the bad habits that the patient has had. The faith community. The faith community has been a strong source of strength for people of color. It will continue to be a strong source of strength. But it's also a community for many groups that doesn't allow for a lot of despair. I saw a couple of the answers said, hey, I didn't need support. And I think many of us in the African American community, not all of us, but many of us are raised that we have to have strength. We have to have resilience. We have to keep moving. So we can grieve today, but then we got to move on. We have other work to do. And so there's not a lot of time to allow for despair. And if you despair too much, it questions how strong is your faith. So my background, my grandfather on my father's side is a Baptist minister in the South. I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He had 3 churches. I was raised in the church. I understand faith. I understand prayer. And I was raised that if you show despair, it shows that your faith is not strong. On the other side, I'm the descendant of a slave. On my mother's side, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave, and he started the church that I was baptized in, that I was married in, that I was raised in. His name is on the cornerstone of that church. So I understand faith. But we have to figure out how in our communities of color we can have faith and have space for normal grief, because grief is normal. Strong Black woman myth. We're going to spend the majority of the time talking about what that means when we say strong Black woman myth. I normally am wearing a pin here that says Black Girl Magic, but I didn't wear it today. But it's like an emblem saying, hey, I'm invincible. I can handle whatever you bring to me today. But we're going to talk a little bit about that. Even when I talk to care providers, they tell me in their support groups, the women of color just seem so resilient. They're so strong. So they're that way because they have to be. We've learned to be that way. We have to wear that mask so that we can survive. That's why I wanted to open with that poem. Lack of non-traditional support modalities. And I think this is something I really want the care providers in particular to think about, especially those who shared in the survey, hey, I had to start my own support group. I had to start my own support space. So what is missing in your space? Sometimes you have to bring the mountain to Muhammad. Don't have Muhammad always come to you because your space may not be a safe space. And you want it to be a safe space for normal grief. So 6 reasons why there may be barriers. 4 of the 6 were already borne out in the survey today. So this next slide, mistrust of the medical community. So I mentioned, for those of you who may not be from the US or maybe it's a distant thing, the Tuskegee syphilis study. So this was a study that actually continued in the United States for 25 years, where they took blood from African-American men who were infected with syphilis and monitored their physical symptoms to learn what syphilis looks like if it's untreated. So when the study first started, we didn't have a treatment for syphilis, but in the middle of the study, we did find a treatment for syphilis. It's just penicillin. They were not given the penicillin so that we could learn the manifestations of syphilis when it's untreated. So even today, when I work in the ICU nursery, one of the states I work in has the highest rates of new syphilis in patients in the United States. So we have a lot of babies that are born with syphilis. The reason I know what syphilis looks like in a baby is because for 25 years, the United States did not treat men who had this condition. So I know what happens to the bones. I know what happens to the heart. I know what happens to the eyes. I know this because of that. So the United States issued a formal pardon to these men. And when President Barack Obama was in office, he actually invited them into the White House and gave them medals. But I just want you to think about that. So if you're serving someone in your communities who has a multi-generational family, certainly somebody who's in their 70s or 80s or 90s, they remember being treated for bad blood. That's what syphilis used to be called, bad blood. They may have even been treated in the hospital that you're working in. They may remember that the hospital experimented on them and didn't give them appropriate treatment. It's also when you're talking to families about withdrawal of care, and when you're talking to families about hospice, they may not trust that you actually don't have a treatment, because in this case, we had a treatment that we didn't provide. More recently, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. If you're not in the medical field, there's something called HeLa cells, H-E-L-A. They were actually named after Henrietta Lacks. She was a Black woman who had cancer. She died, but they were able to harvest her cells, and these cells had the ability to regenerate and create new cells that didn't have cancer. So when I was in medical school in pathology, we learned about these wonderful HeLa cells that were being used in all types of research. They had been harvested from Henrietta Lacks. Her family was never acknowledged. She was never acknowledged. They never received compensation until recently. So Ava DuVernay and Oprah recently did a movie about the story of Henrietta Lacks. And if you don't know about it, I would suggest everybody watch it. It's just one snapshot of many instances of research on communities of color that weren't compensated, that we didn't consent to, that we weren't privy to. So it's a big deal when you ask someone from a community of color to participate in your hospital program, to participate, to use your resources, to come to your support group, because there's a level of mistrust there that has nothing to do with you, but has to do with the legacy of our history in the United States. Next slide. So the legacy of Dr. Marion Sims. So many of you may have seen recently on Facebook, social media, and the news, there's been a lot of discussion about Dr. Marion Sims. Dr. Marion Sims is considered the father of obstetrics and gynecology. He pioneered many of the surgeries, repairing uterine fistula, advancing techniques for cesarean section, advancing techniques for bladder repair. But he learned all of his techniques by practicing on slaves without anesthesia. He had 5 slaves that he used most routinely. They would come into the room and he would practice on them repeatedly to perfect these techniques. 2 years ago, there was a statue of Dr. Marion Sims in his hometown that was down to address this legacy. But people have been bringing up this legacy for years. So many people will say, well, during that time, we didn't really have good anesthesia. Well, during that time, a lot of people had surgery without anesthesia. This is true. During that time, a lot of people did have surgery without anesthesia, but even when anesthesia became available, even when people just use alcohol for anesthesia, these slaves did not receive that, nor did they consent to be operated on. So when I go into the delivery room and somebody says, hand the Sims, there's actually a piece of surgical equipment called the Sims, a speculum. I think about the legacy of all those women who led to the Sims. Now, I don't know if anybody else in the operating room is even thinking about that. I mean, we're trying to have a healthy pregnancy and have a normal baby, but I get triggered every time I hear the name. So there's a level of mistrust there that many are not aware of that is associated with being a person of color in the United States of America. Next slide. So what about this legacy of loss? So one of the things I think is really important when you're counseling families of color who have experienced loss is that when we experience loss, it's not a singular loss. So when Trayvon Martin died, if you're a person of color, it wasn't just Trayvon Martin died, oh my gosh, that's so sad. It was another child in our community has died. We have lost another child. When George Floyd died, it was like another man in our community has died. When Ahmaud Arbery was killed, it was like another man in our community has died. And this loss is not new. So in the top picture, I show a slave master taking a baby away from a Black mother. That is our legacy. That is our legacy. Our children were property. The slave masters could take them at will. They could sell them as will. We had very precious little control over whether we could keep our children or raise our children. And it's 2020, and I still feel like I have very little control over keeping my children safe. My children are 19 and 20, well, my son will be 20 this year. They're 20 and 24. I want them to be safe. I want to keep them safe. So our children were taken, and in substitute, we raised other people's children. We became their nannies. We became their mammies. We became part of their family. So on the bottom, you see a picture of a slave holding a picture of a baby. Here in a segregated train station on the right, you see a Black nanny holding a baby sitting next to the mother. So it wasn't that people didn't believe we could be good mothers. They allowed us to mother their children. They allowed us to nurse their children. They allowed us to breastfeed their children. They allowed us to raise generations of their children. Generations, but we couldn't keep our own children. So when you have loss, even today in 2020, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, a preterm birth, we grieve like all other mothers grieve, certainly, we do. But this legacy of loss, of not being able to hold on to our children, is a legacy that's 400 years in the making. Next slide. So what about the legacy of separation? Someone said in the survey, it was like we talked to you guys before the survey. Someone said, I didn't go because I didn't feel like I would belong. I didn't feel like I belonged. And I know the hospital provider and the bereavement support educators who are here, that is not your intent. You want everyone to be there. You want everyone to feel like they belong. So I doubt that it's anything that you did necessarily that made someone feel like they did not belong. But I think it's really important to understand that here in the US, you know, the Civil Rights Act that outlawed segregation, that was passed in 1964. So it's really only been 53 years that we've been together, So the legacy of separation in the United States is actually longer than the legacy of being together. And so we have that legacy, we see that legacy everywhere. And the families that you're serving may have people in the family who remember that legacy. I recently shared in my personal forums something very similar to this, and many of the families that I serve or people who I work with or people who are friends said, oh yes, you know, Dr. Kincaid, I remember my school was segregated. I remember going into the wrong bathroom. I was white and I accidentally went into the colored bathroom. So this is not 400 years ago slavery. I mean, this is recent in the United States. So I just have a few signs up here. The sign at the top middle is the one that bothers me the most. No dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans. I mean, why would humans be on the same sign as an animal? Restrooms, white colored seating in the rear. On the right, you see Ruby Bridges. You know the story of Ruby Bridges. She had to be escorted by the government to integrate the elementary school. She was in the first grade and people were screaming at her and spitting at her and saying they didn't want her children to be with her. So even though it's 2020 and we've moved forward and segregation is gone, and you know we presumably can go anywhere we want and do anything we want, we know that that's not always necessarily the case. So even in our minds, when we want to come into these spaces, we have to question, is this space going to be okay for me? Is this space going to be a safe space for me? Is it okay for me to be vulnerable in that space? And it takes a lot to be vulnerable in spaces like that. Next slide. So fear of blame and not beating the statistics. Someone said, I was ashamed. So Kylie opened up with the statistics for Black women in the United States for increased rates of death during pregnancy, after pregnancy, as well as the death of our children. When I was in the medical school, I did an extra year to do my master's in public health because someone shared a statistic with me that said that Black women with a college degree were 2 times more likely to experience an adverse birth outcome, 2 times more likely to have a preterm birth. I was horrified. That was 1990 when someone showed me that statistic. I said, you know what? I'm going to just do an extra year. I'm going to get a master's in public health. I need to learn about this because certainly if I have a bachelor's degree, a medical degree, you know, I have a good job, I have insurance, certainly I will not be part of these statistics. And what I found is that for Black women, SES status is not protective. And for Black women, it's the lived experience of being Black in America, much of which has been felt to be related to chronic stress that actually remodels the womb, that increases our risk for poor birth outcomes, coupled with implicit bias. When people see me, they blame me for the situation that I'm in. When people see me, they say, oh, well, if you're taking better care of yourself, if you're taking better care of your diabetes, if you're taking better care of your weight, if you're taking better care of your hypertension, you wouldn't be here. But people who are not of color, Caucasian women have diabetes, they have hypertension, they have obesity. They're not 2 times more likely to have a preterm birth, and they're not 4 times more likely to die as a result of pregnancy. So if you're a person of color and you have been reading anything in the past 10 years, everybody's talking about this, right? Is what birthed the movement, Black Mamas Matter. So when you see headlines like what it's like to be Black and pregnant, when you know how dangerous that can be, and the subtitle says, I knew I had to find a way to have a healthy birth, despite what statistics are telling me. I mean, we do not want to be part of statistics. We want to beat the statistics. We don't want to be blamed for the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Even COVID having higher rates of infection in communities of color just heightened the disparities we already had in the US. But many people blame persons of color. I saw a government official yesterday blame Hispanic Americans for the high rates of COVID in his town. So, I mean, this is a reality, what we're living in. So you may meet someone who may not be coming because they don't want to be blamed. They don't want to say, you know what, I didn't beat the statistic. I am a statistic. The middle, the middle, oh, you're welcome. The middle article, just so we're clear, Black mothers aren't to blame for high infant mortality. I mean, sometimes you just have to say that. Hey, let's stop blaming people of color for the circumstances they find themselves in. Let's think about the systems and the policies that have been in place for years that have led us to this moment. And one of my favorite articles that was a really pivotal article, this was a front page on the New York Times, and it was about Black maternal mortality and Black infant mortality. It led to eventually the Momnibus Act that the United States passed to better track maternal mortality. Why are Black mothers and babies in the United States dying at more than double the rate of white mothers and babies? The answer has everything to do with the lived experience of being a Black woman in America, the lived experience. And so if you do have programs that are providing bereavement support, if you do have programs that are providing perinatal support, this is a big chunk of the population that you want to be serving as well, because our rates are higher. So we should be receiving your resources. So we want to help you close the gap to try to better serve a population that really does need these resources. They may not need all the resources. They may not need them immediately, but we don't want anyone to be in a situation where they wanted resources and didn't receive them. Next slide. Mistrust of society. So we talked about mistrust of the medical community. We talked about the legacy of loss. Now we're talking about mistrust. Oh, we talked about fear of blame. Now mistrust of society. So even if I, in my mind, is saying, you know what? Hey, I have a good house, I have a good income, you know, my kids are doing okay. Both of my daughter is finished college, my son is in college, I'm married, I'm in a 2-parent home, my husband has a college degree. We are going to conduct ourselves in a colorblind society, and we are going to just believe that as long as we're doing what we're supposed to do, everything is going to be okay. I mean, even if we say that to ourselves, we go out into the world and the world shows us every day that that's not true. So you see Ahmaud Arbery jogging, hunted, minding his own business. The bottom slide is the young men that were arrested in Starbucks. When I give a talk, I actually show the video of the Starbucks. The most disturbing thing to me in that video was not that they were arrested. It was the calm that the young men had. They literally just put their arms behind their back, turned around, assumed the position, and allowed themselves to be escorted out of Starbucks. Because if they had protested the way their Caucasian male friend was, it likely could have escalated and been worse. So how can I believe everything is okay when I'm escorted out of Starbucks because I'm sitting in Starbucks waiting for my friend to meet me the way people do every day? The young man in the top right, you guys may recall, was featured at the beginning of the year, or you may or may not have recalled. I'm in Texas, so it was a big deal here. This young man was prevented from graduating and walking with his class because of his hair. They had a rule in the rule book that meant that they couldn't have dreadlocks, they couldn't have cornrows, they couldn't have their hair down. So if he wore his hair up, it would be okay. But when he wore his hair down, it was a problem. This young man's a straight A student, DeAndre. And so he reached national acclaim because of this rule in the Texas law books. So he was on Ellen. He got to go to the Oscars that year. The animated short, I don't know if you guys saw it, but that year, the animated short was called Good Hair. And it was about a dad, an African-American dad who has hair like DeAndre combing his daughter's hair. It's a cute little cartoon and it won the Oscar. Anyway, he got to go to the Oscars. So as a result of this and many other instances where schools actually have policies on the book that say you cannot have cornrows, you cannot have braids. So we may say we're colorblind. We may say this has nothing to do with race, but who is most likely to be wearing braids in your school? Who is most likely to be wearing cornrows? It's people that look like me. It's people that look like me. My son has hair like this young man's hair. And we didn't allow him to get his hair this way until he was in 10th grade. He had wanted his hair this way in junior high. I'm like, no, it's going to be too many problems. You're going to stand out. We just need to graduate. We're not going to do it. And finally, he's like, Mom, can I live? And so he was able to get his locks. So it's things like this that allow us not to trust society, to allow us to be vulnerable. So if I can't trust society with just my everyday life, can I trust you if I've experienced a loss? We have to make sure we have a space for people to be vulnerable. And we have to know that when we meet them, that it's different. And the bottom is a mom holding her son in Flint, Michigan. What's the law about hair removal? Oh, great question. So I'm so glad you asked that. So it's actually state dependent, but there's a national movement. If you actually Google, there's a national movement called the Crown Act, CROWN. California is actually the most progressive. California and New York are the most progressive. They've actually already passed those bills, and those bills say that you cannot discriminate against anyone because of their the way they wear their hair naturally or culturally, a cultural expression of their ethnicity. I actually recently learned that one of the reasons why the slaves wore cornrows is because when they would be running away, they could hide the grains of rice in their cornrows when they were running away, so that when they got to their destination, they would have food. And I actually never knew that. Anyway, so there are some places that still have these rules and policies about the way the hair can be worn, and even the military had a rule about this, and they changed their rule. Not completely, but they changed it a little bit. Anyway, the bottom is a mother in Flint, Michigan. And I just have this picture to show that the official U.S. report reviewing what happened in Flint, Michigan with the lead in the water, the whistleblower who was alarmed at the number of children who were getting lead poison brown water. The official report of Flint, Michigan stated that institutional racism was a reason that that city was allowed to receive this subpar water for so long. And so one of the complications of lead poisoning is developmental delay. So all of these children who've been exposed to lead poisoning, now it's been years now, Flint has their act together now, are now in schools that were already performing subpar, but they may not be able to reach their full potential, and they're going to be labeled as special needs. They're going to be labeled as problem children. They're going to be labeled as those who didn't achieve their full potential in society, but nobody's going to remember all the years they were drinking water and exposed to lead poisoning. So so somebody signed a piece of paper saying it was okay for those communities to receive that. The communities didn't do that. Somebody in government did that. So mistrust of society is huge. Next slide. So the paradox of the strong Black woman, bearing silent pain. And so I don't know if you guys remember a couple of years ago, Black Panther came out, Black Panther 2 is coming out. It was a great moment for everybody, and especially for people of color. We were all Wakanda forever, Wakanda forever. I'm invincible, I'm strong, I can handle anything. And normally when I'm giving a talk, I remind people that Wakanda was it's a fictional country. In Wakanda, they didn't have increased rates of high infant mortality. In Wakanda, they didn't have institutional racism. In Wakanda, they didn't have high rates of maternal mortality. So yes, Black women are strong, but in our strength, there are layers and layers of silent pain that is being borne. And the manifestation of that silent pain is increased maternal morbidity and mortality. It is increased infant loss. It is increased stress for us. It is increased medical issues for us. So we have to find safe spaces to be able to share this pain. And when we have a loss on top of all the other pain we've already been carrying, it gets hard to kind of manage how you can share that or when it's safe to share that. Next slide. So removing the mask, what is the mask? So I have a couple of quotes on here. I want to kind of go through this slide. The first thing I want to draw your attention to, though, is the bottom left, the Superwoman, who she has that shirt on underneath. She has a Superwoman shirt underneath her white shirt. The lady next to her has a mask with a smile, but when you take off the mask, she cries. The lady next to her is actually taking off the Wonder Woman suit, and you see the scars underneath that. I think all women, to a certain degree, have battle scars like this because we have to shoulder so much for the family. But when I think about Black women, I think about Black women carrying the legacy of the race, really. The mothers carrying the legacy of the race because of how Black men were treated from slavery and even to today. So what about this quote? Because we've been taught that strength is an adaptive trait, this should be a good stereotype, right? We have survived the trauma of slavery, yet still live in a society plagued by institutional and causal racism, sexism, and classism. So it's supposed to be a good stereotype, right? We survived slavery so we can survive anything. So we are strong, we're invincible, we are unbreakable. But that's not true. We're human. We are humans, and humans have vulnerability. And it's okay to show vulnerability. We have to show people how to have strength through their vulnerability. And I don't think that for Black women, that's often an option for us. Next slide. So one of the examples of not being able to be vulnerable is Serena. I keep saying Venus, but Serena. So some of you may recall Serena had a complicated pregnancy. Serena was, I think, one of the first times people really understood that this issue of maternal mortality is not a myth. And this is an issue that affects all of us, regardless of our socioeconomic status. Certainly, Serena had access to good health care. Certainly, she was in great health prior to her pregnancy, but she had a history of clots in her legs. She had a history of DVTs. When she experienced shortness of breath during her delivery, she shared that with her OB provider, who dismissed her. She shared it actually with several physicians who dismissed her shortness of breath, and that she was concerned about that. She actually had to go over their heads to get treated, and she actually did have a pulmonary embolus. I mean, you can die from that. So if it can happen to Serena, it can certainly happen to those who have a lot less than Serena. Shortly after having her baby and surviving that and going home with a healthy child, she competed later that year. I think it was something like only 9 months after her delivery at the Wimbledon, and she didn't win. Now, most of us were like, oh my God, what is she doing? My daughter is 24, and I don't think I'm still not in the shape I was in prior to getting pregnant. And she went out 10 months later. She felt like she had to do that because she's a superwoman. And then when she didn't win, she felt like she had to apologize to us. Why did she feel like she had to apologize to us? Why did she feel like she had to carry the burden to say she was sorry? She said, to all the moms out there, I was playing for you and I tried. I hated that she felt like she had to apologize. I hated that she was out there. And I really hated that she felt like she had to apologize to us. But to me, it's another example of having to carry that mantle and being superwoman and not even having space to say, you know what? I just had a baby. I had a pulmonary embolus. I almost died. I will see you guys next year. Next slide. So what about our religious communities? I said a little bit about this in my intro. In religious communities, we are encouraged to grieve, not to grieve, but to celebrate the person who died and has transitioned to heaven. So a lot of this comes from traditions of slavery and from traditions in Africa. Funerals are a big deal. The send-off is a big deal. The processionals are a big deal. You probably can remember some of the funerals from some of the celebrities that have died, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston. I mean, it's like a big deal. And so Floyd also, it was a big deal. I mean, he had a glass carriage. So that is a homage to the past. So we're encouraged to celebrate more the homecoming rather than to sit with our grief. And I think that's something that we have to work really hard in reaching our communities of color to allow them to sit with their grief, whatever that looks like. Along with that, there seems to be an idea that if a person has a strong enough faith, then you don't need to grieve. So I said this at the beginning. If your faith is strong enough, you really shouldn't grieve too much because you know your loved one is in a better place. I went to a funeral once for one of my parents in the NICU. The baby had died over Christmas. It was very sad. It was a Caucasian family. And the mother said in the church, people keep saying that my son is in a better place. She's like, I don't want him in a better place. I don't think there's any better place than being with me. I don't think he's in a better place. I think a better place would have been with me. And that really struck me that she was able to like say that out loud and just say, look, I want my child here with me at the funeral, because I don't think in a community of color, certainly not in the churches I attend, that we would have the freedom to say that in the church, because it would mean we didn't have faith. I loved that she said that, and it stayed with me. I mean, it's been 10 years, and I will never forget her saying that in the middle of the funeral ceremony. Next slide. So why aren't Black women free to grieve or worry? I mean, why not? So if you look at the blue slide, this slide is called weathering. If you Google weathering, chronic weathering, weathering, this is the slide that comes up. And it gives you the picture of the calm beneath the surface. So a lot of times when I'm talking to bereavement coordinators, they'll say, well, Miss So-and-so is so calm. Like she never shows any emotion. She asks questions, but she just seems like she has it all together. And I understand that because I understand that mask. But what is beneath the surface? What may be underneath the surface that they're worried about? Are they worried about poverty, smoking, family support, racism, lack of access to resources? Do they have stress? Do they have hopelessness? Are they worried about unemployment? What are they worried about beneath the surface? And I think, again, I've probably said it several times, it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to know what is beneath the surface. Even for me, just recently, with the George Floyd, I've been more vulnerable on Facebook than I usually am. I'm usually Dr. Boo, and I'm usually laughing, and I'm joking, and I've been more vulnerable, and it's been surprising to people who have been my friends and colleagues for 20 years because they didn't know what was beneath the surface. So why aren't Black women free to grieve or worry? What are we worried? We're worried about breaking down. So if you carry the mask for so long, you have a lot underneath there. So if you actually finally break down and grieve for the whole legacy of all the things that you're carrying, you may not be able to bring it back together. We may not be able to bring it back together. So we have to kind of like keep it. So we're worried about breaking down, worried about not breaking down. We know if we carry too much stress, it's not going to be good for our blood pressure. We're going to stress eat. We're going to not be the best mom for our kids or best support for our partners, best at our workplace. We know that we have to release this stress somewhere. Worry about not being strong enough. So want to be strong, but I know that I'm human. But then am I not strong enough? I have to be able to deal with this because I have to be strong for my kids. I have to keep pressing for my kids' kids. In a society that keeps many people of color on the edge of coping, one cannot afford to lose a grieving person's ability to function and survive. So my literal ability to survive has to do with me keeping it together. Because if I don't, I will not survive. So you're on the edge. So some of you may be familiar with something called the cliff of good health. The cliff of good health keeps people on the edge. It keeps you on the edge, and you don't want to live on the edge. You want to live away from the edge so that you can develop coping skills so that you can heal in a healthy manner. But when you live on the edge, you're always in crisis mode. And I feel like for many people of color, we often are living in crisis mode. Next slide. Okay, so what can we do? So we've covered a lot. We've covered the 6 themes, 4 of the 6, which you guys already echoed. I know Kylie's been keeping up with their questions. We will share the resources, but I just want to end with 6 points. So one, we need to begin with the assumption that African-American grief over the death of someone important in the person's life in all its culture, social class, and religious diversity is similar to Euro-American grief. So we have similarities to the grief of other populations. It's not like you gotta, oh, I gotta have my different box because they're a person of color. Let me pull out the different box. Because grief for us, we all start on the same level in terms of grief and experience loss. It may not look the same, but if the person meant something to us, I mean, we all start at the same point in terms of I hurt. This was unexpected, or maybe it was unexpected. I'm going to miss this person. How I'm going to cope. I can't visualize a life without this. I did not sign up for this. I don't even want to sign up for this. I don't want to remember this. We all understand that when we talk about the different stages of grief. But despite the similarities, you also want to understand that the grief is different. The grief is different. And the main thing about the grief being different is the legacy of loss. When George Floyd died, everyone in the Black community lost another member of their family. Everyone. It's very different than saying, oh my gosh, this is a tragedy, because you can just link it to someone else who died just like George Floyd. Most people who are not persons of color cannot link multiple incidents to what they've just seen on TV. The history and contemporary experiences of African Americans provide unique elements for meaning making about death, because racism is often implicated in grief and death. So in many other communities that are not communities of color, racism is not often implicated. But if you interview people who've experienced loss in the African American community and you ask them, do they think racism was associated? Not just pregnancy loss, I'm talking about loss in general. Many will say yes, they feel like racism was implicated. And a lot of that is related to a mistrust of the medical community. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The unique history of oppression moves African Americans to places that relatively few Euro-Americans are concerning emotional control and emotional expression. So what does that mean? The chronic feeling of being oppressed, the chronic feeling of being disenfranchised, the chronic feeling of having things taken away from me in a manner that is not fair, puts my grief in a different category than the grief of others. It doesn't mean my grief is more important. I'm not saying my grief is more important. I'm saying the grief is different. And so even when you come to a person of color and say, hey, I see you, I experienced a loss like this, it's not going to necessarily be the same. Someone actually messaged me and said, I, like you, my heart is breaking over George Floyd. And I was thinking, I don't think you have any idea how I feel right now. The week after George Floyd, my daughter's in vet school in Alabama, in Tuskegee, at Tuskegee Vet School. Last week, there was a cross burning near her school, a cross burning in 2020. And my daughter is in vet school and has a college degree from University of Massachusetts, a cross burning to be intimidated by the KKK. So their grief is different than mine. I felt helpless when my daughter called me saying there was a cross burning. Did it make the national news? No. But if you Google right now, cross burning in Alabama, it will be there. My daughter called and said, I think I need to come home. They burned a cross here last night. I had no frame of reference for that, but it was part of my legacy of loss. And she's a female, is part of my legacy of loss. So it's different, this unique history of oppression. Finally, differences in life expectancy. So I think this is really important. There are a lot of words on this slide, but one of the things I think is really important is when you think about the legacy of chronic loss, when you're seeing mothers who've experienced loss, when you're seeing communities of color that may have experienced an infant loss or pregnancy loss, is because the loss, the cumulative loss is higher. People are often experiencing loss at a relatively young age. So the cumulative loss is huge. When you meet mothers who've experienced loss and they say, oh, I've lost 7, 8, or 9. I lost my first in my 20s. I lost my first when I was 18. My brother was killed as a result of violence. My dad, was killed as a result of this. My husband died as a result of this. I have a brother that died as a result of violence. So the cumulative loss is huge. This isolated loss is huge, but also when you talk about pregnancy and infant loss, one of the things that's interesting to me is when you meet a mother of color who've experienced multiple losses, it's often not until multiple losses that she gets a workup for infertility. That's a bias in our system. When I meet mothers who are not of color, they may have experienced 1 loss, at most 2, and they get a full workup for infertility. I meet mothers who are maybe on their 5th or 6th loss before they ever get a workup or even a cerclage. This is huge. So this has to do with the way the medical system sees loss in women of color. It's okay. It's okay. We'll work it up next time. You probably can't afford it. It's really expensive. I mean, I know people who've actually had to leave the US to get their infertility worked up, people of color. So the cumulative loss at a relatively young age is interesting. And you might ask your families, whatever loss, have they experienced other loss in their family? Has there been other loss in their community? And often if it's a loss of an older family member, they may believe that it's related to issues beyond the person's actual health or circumstances. Finally, African Americans need to be understood on their own terms. And African Americans are not monolithic. So each family you meet is going to be different, and each family is going to meet you where they are, and you have to meet them where they are too. And you have to figure out what the bridge is. But you do need to understand that the bridge you may have created may not be the best bridge to get to where they are. Next slide. Okay, and so the last thing I want to say about bridges before we take questions is, I thought I had it on there, but I must not have it on there, is allies. So I think one thing that's really important, 1 or 2 people shared they started their own organizations, is if you're a healthcare provider or bereavement support coordinator, find out who in your community who is a bereaved parent of color, who's either using your resources, or even if they didn't use their resources, I would find out what they are doing and seeing if they can come and talk to your group. if they can come and talk to your team, if they can be a mentor mom to one of the moms in your community. Because one of the best ways to bridge trust is for people to see people that look like them. So that doesn't mean that you can't be a powerful source for them. You can, but the bridge often involves people that look like them, because you may be saying things that are offensive and not even know it. You may have programs that are offensive and not even know it. You may not even, I spoke last year in Seattle. Was it Seattle? I have to remember. Portland, Oregon. I had never been to Oregon. And they invited me to speak. Marcia Dons invited me to speak. And I said, do y'all even have any Black people in Oregon? Like, what am I? They wanted me to talk about disparities. I was like, do y'all have any? Because I had never been. And they laughed like, oh, Dr. Kincaid, you're so funny. And so then when I went, I actually researched the history of Oregon and had a statement from their first governor forbidding Black people from living in Oregon. So that law is no longer on books, but it was my first slide to kind of show them about the history of Oregon. So it was like, I mean, it was old, it was after the Civil War and stuff, but that it was one of the states that held out. And so you may have, so if you have people living in town who remember, you know what, my grandmother died at home in pregnancy because this hospital did not allow her to be treated there. And if grandmother comes with the granddaughter and the granddaughter loses her, they may not really want your services because they may have bad experiences with the history of your hospital. It may have nothing to do with you. And so you just want to be open. And so I would find the allies. I would find the mentor moms. I would find the communities you've already served. Sit down and see what you can do that's different. And the last thing I'll say is last year there was a huge event in Washington, DC, and it was called Celebrating Black Motherhood. And it was a 3-day event, and they had like meditation, they had yoga, they had safe spaces to share pain. They talked about physical health, they talked about loss, but it was celebrating Black motherhood, because the person said that they were tired of reading articles about all the bad statistics for Black women. So they wanted to have a day where they could just celebrate the joy. So I think getting out of hospital spaces and having non-traditional meetups, sister, I hear you, we're here for you. Start with your mentors, your mentor moms, persons of color who can talk to you about why they had to create a different place or what they got from your program and what they think your program needs. I think that would be a great start. And I guess I'll stop there. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much. It was amazing. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing here. Hopefully you had a chance to write down our information. I'll include it in the email that I send out. I'm gonna do this and then, okay, so if Dr. Terry, I'm gonna ask you some questions.
Okay.
That are coming in. And if you, I'm gonna encourage you to use the chat box if you can.
Me?
No, not you.
Oh, the questions. Okay.
Okay. If you have questions, use the chat box. If you can write who the question's for. I mean, if it's not apparent. And I have a cat who's meowing. Oh my gosh. Okay, cat, you can wait. Okay, so let me ask some questions. Okay, first of all, someone's asking if we can give a certificate of attendance or completion of the presentation. And yes, I can do that. So we're not offering CEUs, but please email me at my email and I will get that to you. So Victoria is saying, I'm a NICU nurse who also works with families of perinatal loss. I do a follow-up with them. I call them approximately 1 month after. Please advise what else I can add to my routine to support these families.
Well, Kylie, you have a whole curriculum on this. So Kylie has a whole sheet on this. So I'll just say for my own, the neonatal palliative care teams that I started, we have certain times for follow-up. So our first follow-up is at 2 weeks after the loss. Many people are in shock the first week. Then we follow up at 2 weeks. We follow up at 30 days. Then we follow up on whenever the anniversary. Many people lose their babies before they're actually supposed to be born. We follow up on the anniversary of whenever the due date is, and then we do every 3 months. So we do 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. Because by that time, we've reached out enough times that if they were in shock before and they want resources, they can let us know. But we always remember the due date, the anniversary of the loss, because many people reach out to families in the first 2 weeks, but a lot of people don't really reach out to families after the first month, because their family members want to move on, the friends want to move on, everybody wants to move on. So they really want the person to move on. They don't understand that the moving on is a misnomer. Like, there's a new normal. So we follow up. Our first follow-up is at 2 weeks. We send them with the care box when we follow up at 2 weeks. Usually the funeral has happened by then. We usually have autopsy results back by a month. We follow up with the anniversary, then 3, 6, 9 months in a year. So I think the one touch, you'll miss a lot of people, because a lot of people just can't deal right then.
Yeah. Okay. Are there recommended in-depth training for perinatal grief and bereavement in the BIPOC community? Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, Holly, what were you
No, I don't know. I mean,
let's create one. So I personally designed a program for training health care providers and health disparities for infant mortality in the state of Texas for the March of Dimes. And so that's a 6-hour workshop that's very interactive. But I think I love the idea of just the BIPOC community under this new lens. I think we need to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean,
I love it.
I mean, I think I don't know what's out there really, but you're doing amazing stuff. So if we can just continue to use this as a platform.
But to the person there is, I'll email it to Kylie. I have like a 5-page list of resources that I give to people to use to kind of unpack this. These are different. We did it really quickly today, but these are complex conversations. Complex history in the United States takes a while to massage the information. So I have a list, and I like interactive resources better than lectures. So because people get to immerse themselves in the experience. So I can send that list to Kylie and she can share it with all of the attendings. Like if I do a workshop, I have everybody play the life course game. In the life course game, you pull a card and the card says you're Black or white, privileged, underprivileged, or neutral. And you go through life and you just roll the dice and go through life. And you can see by standing on the different spaces how your life circumstances are affected through no control of your own just because of the card you pulled. And so it's a great way for me to break down walls to have deeper conversations later in the workshop.
So I want to say, okay, we will share this recording. It will be available also on the Return to Zero Hope website for free, as well as our previous webinar, which was the topic was how Black women are grieving differently. So, conversations around that. That was from April. So those are both available for free. But I'll send out the link to that after this. Like logistic things. So I'm going between logistics and questions. But okay, so here's a good question that a few people are asking. Could you talk, Dr. Terry, could you talk more about how the lived experience of a Black woman changes the uterus? Is this related to epigenetics? And maybe we could send an article out afterward, to accompany that.
Yes, okay. Yes, so I can. So yes, it's related to epigenetics. So the first thing I would there's a great book about this, and there are 2 really good articles. But I'll send the resources to Kylie later. I was actually looking to see if I had the book in here, but it's downstairs. Anyway, the first thing I'll say is something called the Barker's hypothesis. So if you write that down, Barker, like a dog barks. Barker's hypothesis. So this was the very first biochemical model to show that increased rates of stress, meaning if you have more stress, you have more epinephrine. So when we're stressed, we have adrenaline, we have fight or flight. So if you have more stress, you have more adrenaline, you have more fight or flight. So increased epinephrine actually causes your blood vessels to be remodeled. It actually makes your blood vessels tinier, more narrower, causes blood to be obstructed going through. So one of the common reasons for preterm birth in Black women is preeclampsia or hypertension. And so when I say you're actually remodeled, it's from the years of stress, the chronic stress. Remember I said everything beneath the surface. If you actually measure our adrenaline levels, they're actually higher. If you actually look at those blood vessels under the microscope, they're actually narrower. So those blood vessels that actually supply your womb, that are supposed to keep your baby in there, it's like a ticking time bomb. And so the cumulative effect of that progressive narrowing, that was the Barker's hypothesis, leads you to have preterm birth, increased rates of high blood pressure, and low birth weight children. And we also learned that mothers who have this history will have their children will also go on to have low birth weight children and preterm children. So even if I put you in an environment where I say everybody's, it's going to be kumbaya, there's no racism, it's all great, because of what your mom has gone through, that you're already, your womb is already remodeled. The second thing I want to say is there are a number of models to show that Black women report higher rates of stress during pregnancy. Let me repeat it. Higher rates of stress during pregnancy. Because some people will say, oh, Dr. Terry said that Caucasian women are not stressed during pregnancy. No, I didn't say that. I think all women are stressed. I think if you have a partner, you're even more stressed. If you have kids, you're even more stressed. It's like, you know, being a woman is stressful. So, but Black women reports higher rates during pregnancy. So I usually share results from a focus group. If you ask Black women during their second month of pregnancy, what are you most worried about? If I had a crystal ball and I said, hey, everybody, you're going to have a normal pregnancy. Your baby's going to be fine. Your baby's going to be healthy. You're not going to have a stillbirth. You're not going to have a miscarriage. You're not going to have a preemie. They do not have a birth defect. The baby is going to be healthy. What are you now most worried about? When you poll 100 Black women, they were most worried about bringing their child into this world. Caucasian women do not share that. They don't share that. Can you imagine going through your whole pregnancy worried about bringing a child into this world? When Trayvon Martin died, the biggest concern was for Black women carrying a male child, that they would be killed by a police officer. So when I give this talk to obstetricians who are supposed to check your mental health during the visits, they were flabbergasted because they're like, oh, well, yeah, I asked them, are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you getting enough exercise? But I'm not asking them, oh my God, are you worried about racism? Well, maybe you should, because maybe they need a mental health provider. So Barker's hypothesis was the very first study to show that the increased rates of adrenaline, epinephrine actually remodel your blood vessels, cause narrowing to your womb, increase your rates for preterm birth. There have been many, many more since then. Yes, it's epigenetics. So that's why I say the womb is literally being remodeled by the lived experience. So what is the lived experience? The lived experience of being a Black woman in America. So there's another famous study by Dr. James Collins in Chicago, where people were hypothesizing, oh, well, I don't think it has to do with racism. I think there's something about being Black. There's something about having melanin. Having melanin increases my risk for bad outcome. It's just the melanin. So that study has actually been done and repeated several times. And in that study, they were able to show that not African Americans, African immigrants to this country, when they first come to the United States, their birth outcomes are similar to Caucasian women. They do not have increased rates of dying in pregnancy. They do not have increased rates of preterm birth. They do not have increased rates of infant mortality. African immigrants. But after one generation of living in the United States, one generation of living in the United States, their outcomes are just like Black Americans who have always been here. Increased rates of dying during pregnancy, increased rates of preterm birth, increased rates of infant mortality. So there's a very nice graph that kind of shows that people have tried many times to blame it on melanin, but it has nothing to do with the melanin. So when I say lived experience of being in America, I mean the lived experience of navigating the whammy of being Black and female, minority in the United States, on the biases and the systemic racism we have to navigate on a daily basis. For example, I'm a physician. I'm in my 21st year of practice. At least once a week, someone asks me to carry their trash out of their room, or asks me to take their order because they think that I'm the help there to bring them their food. So sometimes I just take the trash. Sometimes I just say, okay, what would you like to have? Because, you know, they just need their food. But even if I introduce myself as the doctor, often they will tell parents, some families will tell my nurses later, oh, somebody came in, you know, I normally have my hair in an afro. They'll say a Black lady came in with an afro, but we're still waiting to talk to the doctor, even if I introduce myself as the doctor. So it's just navigating these spaces. So when I say lived experience, it's navigating these spaces. If you guys get a chance, Google Toxic. It's a movie trailer, A Day in the Life of a Black Woman. And it's a 2020, it's a movie that was done by the YMCA in Cleveland to show this lived experience narrative. It's only 30 minutes, and it talks about going to work, hearing conversations at work that are inappropriate, but not being able to say anything. Shows her dropping her child off at school, her child being reprimanded for having hair that didn't fit the norm. It shows her going to see a physician saying, hey, I feel like my baby isn't kicking as much. I feel like I'm having contractions, and the physician saying, not even looking at her, saying, hey, nothing's wrong. You're fine, go back home. And then she comes back later and has a stillbirth. Even though she knew something was wrong, she was dismissed. So if you just Google the trailer, you can buy the movie too, but I think you can get enough from just the trailer. Oh, somebody said that happened to me. The name of the movie is Toxic, A Day in the Life of a Black Woman. So if you put in Toxic, you'll just get the movie trailer. The movie itself, as a nonprofit, you can buy it for like, with a teaching guide, it's like $199, or it may be maybe $300 for a nonprofit, but just the trailer is enough to give you enough information. The movie is called Toxic,
Yeah,
Toxic.
I'll include the link to the trailer.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Genevieve got it. So anyway, so that was a long answer. And there's a really, really great book about epigenetics and what happens before we're born. I can see the cover. It's blue and it has an egg on the front. I don't know why I'm blanking on it. But anyway, I will email. I'll try to see if I can find it while we're talking. I mean, I could go downstairs to get it, but I don't want to leave.
Okay, somebody's asking about, do placentas age faster due to the weathering effect?
So anybody, that's a great question. So actually anybody who has chronic hypertension or preeclampsia, when that placenta comes out, you guys, it looks like the placenta should be like this strong, beautiful veil. If you have chronic hypertension or preeclampsia, that placenta, when it comes out, it looks like a spider web that's been shot up. So yes, this placenta is more fragile. The other thing is the umbilical cord. In babies who the mothers have had this chronic process. The umbilical cord in a normal size baby, you know, you guys who have kids, you remember the cord was all fat and juicy and, you know, we had to put the clamp on it. But when you have a baby that's whose mother has high blood pressure, that uterus has not been feeding the baby well. The baby's been having to scavenge. That cord is scrawny, very stringy, thin. And you can, it's not hard to see why the baby didn't grow well and why the baby needed to come out.
Okay, someone's asking also, could you speak to allostatic load, Rachel?
Yes, Rachel. So allostatic load is kind of, I actually have a good slide that's animated, Rachel. So Rachel, I described for you guys that the effect of the epinephrine causing remodeling of the blood vessel. So allostatic load, allostatic refers to how much stress or how much pressure our neurons can handle. So you guys know that a certain amount of stress is good, right? You know, you getting ready for a presentation. I was stressed before this talk. So that was some good stress. It got me moving and made sure I was online in time with Kylie. But there's a difference between being stressed and stressed out. So allostatic load, if you could imagine a scale. So when you have fight or flight, your body is constantly trying to keep you in balance. You know, a little stress and then a little response to the stress, a little stress and a little response to the stress. But if you have a whole lot of stress, what happened?
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Hold on.
I can hear you.
Can you try? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you?
They
can hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me now, Kylie?
Okay, they can hear you. I just can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No, it's okay. Keep talking.
Okay, so allostatic load refers to how much They can hear both of us. Okay. Oh, well, she can't hear us, y'all. Well, y'all better tell. Okay, fine. So allostatic load refers to how much stress your neurons can hold, right? So you have a little stress, your body responds to that. You have a little stress, your body responds to that. You have a little stress, your body responds to that. But if you have a whole lot of chronic stress, you have stress, 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 your allostatic load is too much. And when your allostatic load is too much, it leads to poor outcomes like more stress, more diabetes, more hypertension, more obesity. So it's all a result of increased catecholamines, increased hormonal response. Some people may see it as a secondary form of diabetes. So allostatic load refers to the checks and balance that our body has to try to keep us in check. So some stress is good, but too much stress is bad. So I have a slide where it's animated and I show people the difference between being stressed and stressed out. So I don't know, Kylie can't hear us. Kylie, can you hear us now? Can you hear us now, Kylie? No.
I can't hear you for some odd reason, but
okay.
How about we take one final question and then we're going to wrap this up. So last question is, what about fibroids in Black women and pregnancy loss?
So Black women do have an increased risk for fibroids. There's a lot of data as to why that happens. So anybody with large fibroids has a risk for pregnancy loss, blocking the exit from the womb. But Black women have a higher risk of fibroids. So the main thing I say to Black women who have a history of fibroids is often Black women with fibroids are counseled to have the fibroids removed, or counseled that they can't have a normal pregnancy because of the fibroids. And what I know, especially if they don't have any live children and they really want to have a normal pregnancy, I try to refer them to someone who has expertise in working with Black women with fibroids and expertise in getting them to a normal pregnancy. So, but Black women do have a higher risk of fibroids, and I'm not familiar if there's research related to stress related to that. I know there's research related to preeclampsia, preterm birth, hypertension.
Okay, are you finished?
I'm finished.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I still can't hear you, but Dr. Terry, I just want to say thank you so much. That was amazing. And I think everyone else agreed, like just so educational. And thank you for giving your time. And I'm excited to share this, and yeah, I'll send out an email with the link. We'll send out resources, and please do share this with other people. As I said, it will be available for free on our website. And I have lots of other topics for this series, and just looking at racial disparities in maternal health care and grieving and all that. So please send us emails to follow up if you have questions, or if you have ideas or questions on what you would want to know more about. So we're open to that. So thank you everyone so much for being here, for spending your time with us, and just being open to listening and learning. So thank you. Okay, have a good day. Bye.
Bye, you guys. Bye, Kylie. She can't hear us.